Good day, everyone. Welcome to our discussion on the war in Ukraine and what Spirit of America is doing to help Ukraine at this critical time, and in particular, some of the things we saw and learned on our trip to Ukraine, Germany, and Poland over the last 2 weeks. I am Jim Hake, the founder and chief executive officer at Spirit of America, and I'll be joined by Matt Dimmick, our regional manager and lead for our work in Ukraine. And I'll kick it over to Matt in a second. Also on the trip, we were joined by our regional director, Colleen Denny and Megan Mamala on the Spirit of America team. And I have to say, there is absolutely no substitute for seeing our team in action on the ground. And I'm sure if all of you could have been there with me, you would be just as proud as I am about the work that Spirit of America team and Spirit of America is doing. It's just great to see under very difficult circumstances. And I also want to thank today all the generous supporters on the call here, including members of our advisory board and board of directors. We, of course, could not do all this without you. So as background for people who are not familiar with Spirit of America, we are a privately funded 501c3 nonprofit. We work alongside U.S. troops and diplomats all over the world to support them and help them defend freedom and strengthen the front lines of democracy. And one of the ways that we do that is, you can think about it as filling the gaps between what is needed and what government can do. And government can't do everything, and we fill those gaps, and they're very critical gaps in Ukraine right now, as Matt will describe. We're the only organization that has an agreement with the United States Department of Defense that allows the U.S. military to collaborate with us, to receive assistance and provide logistical support. And that relationship, it's really an unprecedented partnership, has never been more important than it is now in helping Ukraine. As further background, Spirit of America has been active in Ukraine, helping Ukraine defend its freedom since 2014. The relationships and networks that we've built both on the US side and Ukrainian side since that time have been instrumental in terms of our asymmetric impact in Ukraine over the last year and a half. And we understand that what happens in Ukraine, the outcome of this conflict, of this war, will have consequences for generations. And our focus is on saving lives and helping Ukraine win. And since the war began, we provided tens of millions of dollars and hundreds of tons in assistance, non-lethal assistance, to the Ukrainian military, especially territorial defense forces and special operations forces. Our assistance, what the exact things that we're providing over that time have evolved as the war has evolved. Early on, it was about mass protection and mass support to assist the mobilization in Ukraine. That was things like body armor and ballistic helmets. And today, as you'll hear Matt talk about, it's a wholly different set of asymmetric impacts that we're having with things from advanced communications gear and so on. There's some things today that we are not able to go into detail on in a public forum, but we're happy to discuss those things with folks in private. But as far as what everyone on this call can do, if you're looking for a very high impact, very effective way to save lives and help Ukraine win, a way that is legal, accountable, compliant, and tax deductible, we will be your friends at Spirit of America. So what I learned and what we all learned on this trip is, and I really hope comes through today, is that Spirit of America can be the difference that makes a difference in Ukraine. And I know that's true, and it will depend on whether we can act at a large enough scale and with enough speed. One of the things that we'll hopefully be able to talk a little bit about is some of the interactions we had with not just the Ukrainian military and U.S. military, but I'll say the regular Ukrainian citizen. And at one point, a young woman who was very thankful that we were there helping her country said, "Well, what is Spirit of America? Why is Spirit of America here?" And I said, "Well, I founded Spirit of America to stand up for what America stands for. And today, Ukraine is fighting for its freedom and democracy. I said, and that is exactly what what America stands for. And she said, I mean, the look on her face was, yeah, got it. And that made sense. So a housekeeping point, if you have any questions today, please submit them via your Q&A toolbar, on the Zoom toolbar. I'll do my best to field those with Matt and get to them. And so Matt's going to give an overview of what we learned and saw and try to pack a couple of weeks now into 24 minutes. And Matt is just the person to do it. He's a retired Army colonel. His last assignment was as the Russia director on the US National Security Council. And he was the president from 2019 to 2021. And he was the president's principal advisor on Russia during that time. So Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Jim. And as Jim said, we just returned from an extended field visit to Germany, Poland, and Ukraine just this Saturday. We were there for 2 weeks. We consulted with all of our US and Ukrainian partners and checked on progress for a slew of projects. And I think we gained some extraordinary insights into the effects that we're having and where we can most effectively press forward. First of all, as you all know, we have been deliberately pursuing a mission to help Ukraine win. So our main question was, what are Ukraine's chances to win at this stage of the war? And what can Spirit of America do to increase those odds? And I think what we learned is that the Ukrainians are pursuing basically an overall strategy to stretch the Russians across the entirety of their 600-mile front. This requires them to engage in intense fighting to wear down the Russian front lines and prevent the redeployment of those Russian forces to reinforce Zaporizhia, where the Ukrainians hope to achieve a breakthrough. And simultaneously, while they're doing that, they're also seeking to starve Russian frontline forces by targeting their logistics, their ammunition, air defense, and artillery support. And the expectation is that eventually Russian forces in some part of the line, especially in the Zaporizhia front, will just wear down and fail, creating gaps that will open up opportunities for Ukrainians to break through. And when that happens, the Ukrainians hope to have enough combat power remaining to push rapidly through those gaps towards the Black Sea and cut the Russian army in two, where the remaining pieces can be subsequently isolated and defeated. So while that strategy is unfolding on what's basically an unknown timeline, the reality right now for soldiers on the front is that fighting is intense across almost the entirety of the front line, and casualties are steadily mounting. But Ukrainians are making steady gains despite the challenges of facing an entrenched Russian army that still retains incredible mass in terms of equipment and personnel. And from what we hear, every battle is a furious fight between small groups of infantry who are advancing tree line by tree line to create shifts in the front measured in literally just hundreds of meters a day, 100 meters a day. And honestly, this worries a number of people we met who are concerned that losses of personnel and equipment are approaching dangerous levels of unsustainability, and that the pace of advance is just too slow. They worry that the current strategy is playing into Russia's strength of attrition warfare that works for Russia in the long term. And so how this campaign ultimately unfolds is really uncertain. And there is a lot of danger ahead, even though the Ukrainians possess a number of advantages, still give them a slight edge. As we've discussed before, the Ukrainians possess higher morale. They've got an unquenchable will to fight. They have superior leadership, and now they've added superiority in long-range precision artillery fires as well. However, the task still remains daunting, and it's possibly a toss-up at this point whether the Ukrainians can deliver the decisive blow this season that precipitates the end of this war. So with this in mind, we left Ukraine with a sober understanding that if Ukraine is ultimately successful, it will potentially be by a very slim margin. The separation between a win in the near term or a protracted conflict that favors Russia may just come down to how much of a boost Ukraine can get right now. That realization also drove home the point for us that what Spirit of America is doing in Ukraine at this very moment and in the coming months with our deliberately focused high payoff projects could actually constitute that marginal difference that Ukraine needs to shorten this war and save countless lives. In effect, the Spirit of America could be the difference maker if we can continue applying our efforts at scale and speed during this most critical point of the war.
Yeah, and I want to pile on what Matt just said there, because it is the critical point. And I have to say, I'm not sure if I would, how much I would have believed it if I hadn't seen it myself and the folks that we talked to and the things that we learned. It seems, on the one hand, implausible that a privately funded American nonprofit could make the difference in a war which is being fought to defend the free world. And what's happening in Ukraine, that's not an exaggeration at all. And what we learned about, based on the expansion of some of the things that we've invested in Ukraine and the assistance we provided, is if we can do that fast enough and on a large enough scale, it can be the difference that helps Ukraine end this conflict successfully and win a peace, or win a cessation of the war that is favorable to Ukraine and that sets it up for long-term being able to preserve and protect its freedom and democracy. So with Matt, if you could go through a few examples of the projects that we saw that we're supporting that have that asymmetric impact. And, you know, I have a couple of young folks in my family say, you know, what's asymmetric mean? And because we do talk a lot about that. And what, you know, basically it means off scale. It means, you know, a dollar in can have $100 or $1,000 worth of impact. And we've invested in some things that actually fall into those categories. And it's quite remarkable. Again, given our speed and flexibility, it makes a big difference. So Matt, give a few examples of that, please.
Sure, and I'd like to explain, you know, all the projects that we have underway, because they're all very impactful. But we only have time for a couple, so I'll just lead off by saying that, you know, our visit to Germany really cemented for us how Spirit of America provides unique value to our U.S. and Ukrainian partners that just cannot be replicated through any other means. And I can also say that our agreement with the Department of Defense that encourages the uniformed officials to consult with us and help identify needs has paid off repeatedly in big ways. And there has been no higher payoff than the fielding of a tactical network that has exceeded everyone's expectations in terms of its effectiveness. And, you know, I'll give you the story briefly. Basically, at the end of last year, the U.S. vastly expanded its intelligence sharing rules in ways that allowed the U.S. to provide Ukraine with legally sanctioned access to a trove of information that the U.S. routinely scoops up every minute of the day. You know, much of that information is absolutely invaluable to commanders and units in the field who could take that data, interpret it in real time, and use it to achieve significant outcomes. Unfortunately, the standard means to transfer that information is impossibly inefficient due to incompatible systems between the U.S. and Ukraine. For example, you know, a physical copy of the information that we're talking about has to effectively be hand carried from the desk of an American to a Ukrainian in some combined headquarters. Then the Ukrainian officer has to laboriously transfer that data to his systems after scanning and emailing it. So as you can imagine, under those circumstances, more often than not, timely information with tactical implications would grow stale and be useless, while Ukrainians had to wait for it to be hand processed and distributed. So the answer is a tailored tactical network that solves all of those problems. And the U.S. has some experience with such a network. This kind of network runs application-based command and control systems via a secure cloud using servers. And then there's a hardware backbone of commercial off-the-shelf phones and tablets that makes it all work. So effectively, those applications and the hardware serve as a bridge for Ukrainians to access this vast pool of information that the U.S. is allowed to share with them. And all of it is basically available at the click of a button. So with this system in hand, you know, the Ukrainians would be able to have a flow of information, and that flow of information changes overnight from the previous circumstances, which were basically stuttering and glacial, to conditions where that information can be shared seamlessly and instantaneously. And then downstream, this system allows Ukrainians in the field to use that information much more nimbly and effectively. So for Ukrainian commanders in the field with these kinds of systems, their ability to see the battlefield in depth in real time would basically give them a superpower to outthink and outmaneuver the Russians and deliver blows against some of their most high-value assets far beyond the front lines. However, as soon as our U.S. colleagues set out to field a version of this system to the Ukrainians, they immediately ran into the problem of how to procure basically just hundreds of cell phones and tablets to bring this program to life. And frankly, you know, this is a symptom we heard over and over again at the headquarters in Wiesbaden. The U.S. is able to pull lots of lethal equipment, major sophisticated weapon systems from Presidential Drawdown Authority and send that immediately to Ukraine, where it gets fielded. But if it's not in our inventory, then the U.S. has to use another pot of money from the Ukraine Security and Assistance Initiative. But that money comes with all kinds of restrictions, processes, and cumbersome bureaucracy that slows down the procurement. And equipment that's purchased that way can take months, some cases years, to finally emerge from the pipeline. And this is what our folks in Germany were faced with. We don't have cell phones and tablets in our inventory. They need to be bought and purchased by going through US Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative funding. That would have taken probably, in their estimate, until 2024 to actually purchase the tablets and the cell phones that they needed to make this work. Luckily, someone in the headquarters at Wiesbaden thought to reach out to us for help, and we've been in contact with them periodically. So they knew us, they trusted us. Of course, we immediately recognized the potential of the project that they were recommending for us, and we stepped in to buy those hundreds of phones and tablets that they were able to immediately put in the hands of the Ukrainians and hook it up to this tactical network. That was enough to field a test run at the level of a core-sized element, and that core is playing an essential role in the counteroffensive today. So those results have been nothing short of astounding. We got the back brief from our U.S. colleagues, and they keep a running scorecard of the damage inflicted on the Russians that is directly traceable to operations enabled by this specific tactical network. As of last week, during our visit, that number had topped $2.1 billion with an accumulation rate of basically $1 billion a month and counting. That's not bad for an investment of $600,000. And that overwhelming success is spurring the U.S. to extend this incredibly high payoff system to the rest of the Ukrainian armed forces as quickly as they can. And they're pursuing the funding necessary to make those large scale purchases.
Yeah, this was amazing to see and to hear. And so the 2.1 billion that Matt referred to is the value of Russian weapon systems that were eliminated because of this network that Spirit of America provided the key missing ingredient to make operational. So keep in mind that the purpose of that $2.1 billion in Russian weapon systems was to kill people, was to kill Ukrainians, soldiers and civilians. That those same artillery systems and weapon systems strike schools and hospitals in eastern Ukraine just the same way they strike Ukrainian soldiers. So that's $2.1 billion of death and destruction machinery that is now not operational anymore. And that is made possible by a $600,000 investment by Spirit of America, which is an extraordinary return on investment just financially. Not even factoring in the incalculable loss of life or lives saved that happened because of that. So I want to big numbers like that sometimes obscure the human impact that we were able to have with that. Anyway, back to you, Matt. Sorry.
Yeah, and I'll segue. We had a chance during the trip to assess the value of another very high payoff project that we just jumped into. As we all know, the Ukrainians have received hundreds of highly sophisticated weapons for air defense, long-range precision artillery, ground combat systems. These are incredibly valuable for the Ukrainians in winning this war. The Russians know this as well, and they have set out to deliberately target those systems and remove them from the battlefield. So the Ukrainians, basically, thanks to their inherent ingenuity, they created a capability to deceive and confuse the Russians in ways that make it extremely challenging for the Russians to actually find and destroy these high-value targets. The only challenge is that the Ukrainians just don't have the funding resources to bring this capability to a more appropriate scale, which is yet another example of something that lies within this gap that the U.S. government finds hard to fill, but it can be filled with outside resources, such as ours from Spirit of America. So this is another example of where our deep and trusted relationships with the U.S. military and with the Ukrainian government has paid off again. U.S. military helped us confirm this critical need, and then the Ukrainian general staff gave the nod to the program leaders to share their plans with us so that we could help. And what we learned is sensitive and will continue to be so until this war is over. So we can only share the barest minimum of details. In fact, the Russians are furious about this program and are on the hunt to take out this capability, at its source if they can ever find it. But the bottom line is we recognize the importance of this project and funded the purchase of a couple hundred of these invaluable systems. And then during our trip, we actually had the opportunity to visit one of the sites where they are producing the systems that we're talking about. And we were blown away by their usefulness and effectiveness. In fact, there's a clear case to be made that our investment of about $1.4 million for this particular project, it will have the immediate effect of protecting hundreds of millions of dollars of essential Ukrainian systems from destruction at the hands of the Russians, not to mention the hundreds or even thousands of lives that will be saved in the process, and the residual effect that Russian munitions and effort wasted in fruitless attacks basically drains away their ability to conduct successful attacks. So that has proven to be a hugely successful project, and we're looking forward to continuing to support it in the future.
Yeah, and on that one, and that I wish we could get into more detail on, but again, in a public forum, it's not possible. But what we're working on next, among a number of other things, is the scaling up of what's the support that's needed to take that tactical network that Matt described from hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers and commanders to thousands, and with this deception systems that he referred to, from a couple of hundred to about 4,000 of those. And again, that's where the scale and speed, if we can accomplish it, and that depends on support that we receive, financial support. If we're able to do that, those are the kind of things that have the asymmetric impact that we're talking about. One of the things that we'll ask Matt to speak about here as well, he mentioned Russia is fighting a war of attrition, where it's trading large numbers of Russian soldiers, really with apparent disregard for the cost of human life. Ukrainians cannot, both culturally as well as practically, really fight and win that kind of a war. So one of the ways that we think about our support at Spirit of America is investing in people, and especially investing in people in Ukraine that are champions of new ideas and ideas that need to be tested to see if they work. So there are a couple of examples of that I'll let Matt describe.
Yeah, and I know we're running short on time, so I'll be very brief, but we were able to visit the captain's training course that we funded and helped the Territorial Defense Force get off the ground. And we found out that not only has it continued to be wildly successful in putting trained captains in the field, where units that are led by captain's course graduates have strikingly lower levels of casualties and much higher performance. And I think that says it all as far as the value of that course. But what's even more interesting is this particular idea that the Territorial Defense Forces have has spread to the rest of the military. It's attracted interest from the other services. It's attracted interest from the senior levels of the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian military, and other services are coming to the Territorial Defense Force to find out how they built this course and get ideas for how they can replicate it in their own service. And in the meantime, they are lobbying to get slots for their captains so that their captains can come through this training and get the same value. We also visited the truck refurbishment plant, one of the largest plants that's working on refurbishing old Russian trucks. And again, we saw the same thing. This idea has flowered into something larger than we anticipated, and has also spurred other parts of the Russian government, the Ukrainian government, who also have derelict vehicles sitting in motor pools, to work on a similar program. So it's jumped over the boundary from the Territorial Defense Forces to other parts of the Ukrainian government, and it's an example of a good idea that was funded, was allowed to flourish, and is now expanding because other parts of Ukrainian government recognize its value as well.
Thank you, Matt. And we have a few questions. I don't think we'll have time to get to them all, but one is, can you explain how we make sure the assistance we're providing is not duplicating what government is doing?
Yes, and that's one of the reasons why we talked with headquarters in Wiesbaden, Germany, the Security Assistance Group for Ukraine. They're at the control and command and control mechanism for all of U.S. assistance, and matter of fact, coalition assistance that flows through Ukraine. So we talk with that headquarters, and we find out what they're doing, what they're planning on doing, and that helps us, understand what those particular gaps are that the U.S. government can't fill. So we're very confident that we're not duplicating anything that the U.S. government is doing, or not trying to add dollars to what's already being carefully covered or about to be covered.
And one of the things that is important to note on top of that, let's say, is the connectivity we have both on the U.S. side from high levels at the Security Assistance Group for Ukraine, as Matt mentioned, down to special operations forces that are training Ukrainian forces. That our ability to navigate those relationships, same kind of thing on the Ukrainian side, allows to get a picture very, very quickly of what's being done and what's needed and who is doing what, to make sure that we are focused in the highest payoff areas that we can, all with the goal of both saving lives and helping Ukraine win. And here's a question. How much money do you need to raise, and how quickly? And I'll say, well, thank you for the question. And what we've set out to do is raise $200 million as quickly as we possibly can. And this morning in our first meeting back with one of our supporters of the Ukraine effort, that person made a new $5 million commitment this morning. So that's a good start. And those funds we can walk through. We probably don't have time today I know we don't have time today to get into the details of that. We're happy to do that with our supporters, of course, but providing the assistance that we're talking about there is at the right scale for what's needed in Ukraine. And the key right now is to do it with enough speed. It's not the half measures and waiting to see how things go. It's not the time for that. We have done the testing and evaluation over the last year and a half to be ready to put those funds to work to have the desired effect. And another question: what mechanism do you have to ensure that the material you provide actually gets to the front lines where it is needed? So, Matt, to you on that one, please.
Yeah, it's a good question, and one that everyone's kind of concerned about is how do you guarantee that the stuff that we're providing is making it to the right place? And one thing we do is we make our field visits on a periodic basis to check on the programs, see the results, and talk with everybody that's involved with the program to make sure that it's working and that they're getting what they need and they're getting what was promised to them. And we really leverage our relationships with the units that we are working with the headquarters that we're working with, to help us, ensure that the projects that we're working are being executed the way that they were intended, and that the outputs of those projects are getting to the right place. So it's really just being on the ground, talking with the right folks, getting feedback from the end users that are getting it, and finding out how the stuff is working.
And I'll, with our last minute or so here, just say a couple of things to wrap up. I'm sorry we can't get to all the questions. But, I mentioned earlier what is at stake in Ukraine. And there are three ways that I think about that and we think about it. One is let's say the national security or global security picture. And Russia is, as a first step, seeking to erase Ukraine. And its intentions are not to stop with Ukraine. And as in talking with one of our advisory board members, General Jim Mattis, the last few days, he pointed out, well, Ukraine is the shield of Europe. And this is why the Baltic states and Poland are so motivated to help stop this war and help Ukraine win. So the security ramifications are not just about Ukraine. It affects all of Europe. And then you look at what China and Xi might be learning from what happens here is if the West, the US, NATO, and our allies fail here to stop this war and help Ukraine win, it's pretty easy to imagine what that means to Xi in China with respect to Taiwan, the Asia Pacific, what other bad actors might learn from this as well. And that's why we talk about this, the consequences going on for having effect for generations. There's a humanitarian piece, and Russia is still kidnapping children from Eastern Ukraine and taking them to Russia to help Russify Ukraine. That's just kidnapping children. There's still torture happening, targeting of schools and hospitals, in addition to the more military focused part of the war. So that's happening day in, day out. So the humanitarian piece, you look at that and say, well, as an American citizen, am I okay with that? And we're not okay with that. So we're trying to do everything we can to stop that kind of suffering at its source. So that suffering is Russia's war against Ukraine. And the last part, which we talked about with a number of folks in Ukraine, because people are concerned about the America's leadership in the world and how long America will stay with this and public support. And it's a valid concern. So if you are worried about isolationism in America, you ought to be really worried about what happens in Ukraine. And here's why. And it is, in Ukraine, we have the most favorable circumstances to help a country win and prevail that's fighting for freedom and democracy that you could possibly have. You have an adversary who is the worst possible adversary, committing war crimes and all the things I just mentioned from a humanitarian standpoint. And you have allies, it's not just America. We have our NATO allies. NATO is strong. Our allies are stronger than ever before. And we have the best possible partner you could have in trying to help freedom and democracy prevail. The Ukrainians do not need to be convinced of anything. They understand that their existence is at stake. So they are fighting as hard as they possibly can. So you have all those conditions. Now, if America and our allies, if we don't come through and help see this through to victory in Ukraine, I would easily imagine that folks who are strongly isolationist will look at that and say, there you go. There's another example of how America failed. Our leadership in the world is just is a silly idea. Let's just hunker down at home. And what we know at Spirit of America is, apart from our many imperfections as a country, America is a force for good in the world. Our leadership matters, and the world is a better place because of America's leadership. So that is also at stake in what's happening in Ukraine. We're 3 minutes over. My apologies for that, but please join with us and help make this happen. Thank you very much for being with us today.